and you see increasing intolerance in our politics. And loud voices get the most attention. This reminds me of the poem by the great Irish poet W. B. Yeats. Where the best lack all conviction, and the worst are full of passionate intensity. So this is a defining moment. And what happens on this continent has consequences for people around the globe. If a unified, peaceful, liberal, pluralistic, free market Europe begins to doubt itself, begins to question the progress that's been made over the last several decades, then we can't expect the progress that is just now taking hold in many places around the world will continue. Instead, we will be empowering those who argue that democracy can't work. That intolerance and tribalism and organizing ourselves along ethnic lines. And authoritarianism and restrictions on the press, that those are the things that the challenges of today demand. So I've come here today, to the heart of Europe, to say that the United States and the entire world needs a strong and prosperous and democratic and united Europe. Perhaps you need an outsider, somebody who is not European. To remind you of the magnitude of what you have achieved. The progress that I described was made possible in large measure by ideals that originated on this continent in a great enlightenment and the founding of new republics. Of course, that progress didn't travel a straight line. In the last century, twice in just 30 years, the forces of empire and intolerance and extreme nationalism consumed this continent. And cities like this one were largely reduced to rubble. Tens of millions of men and women and children were killed. But from the ruins of the Second World War, our nation set out to remake the world, to build a new international order and the institutions to uphold it. A United Nations to prevent another world war and advance a more just and lasting peace. International financial institutions like the World Bank and International Monetary Fund to promote prosperity for all peoples. And it wasn't easy. Old animosities had to be overcome. National pride had to be joined with a commitment to a common good. Complex questions of sovereignty and burden sharing had to be answered. And at every step, the impulse to pull back for each country to go its own way had to be resisted. More than once, skeptics predicted the demise of this great project. But the vision of European unity soldiered on, and having defended Europe's freedom in war, America stood with you every step of this journey. A Marshall Plan to rebuild, an airlift to save Berlin, a NATO alliance to defend our way of life. America's commitment to Europe was captured by a young American president, John F. Kennedy, when he stood in a free West Berlin and declared that freedom is indivisible. And when one man is enslaved, all are not free. With strength and resolve and the power of our ideals, and a belief in a unified Europe, we didn't simply end the Cold War, freedom won. Germany was reunited. You welcomed new democracies into an even ever closer union. You may argue over whose football clubs are better, vote for different singers on Eurovision. Yes, European unity can require frustrating compromise. It adds layers of government that can slow decision-making. I understand. I've been in meetings with the European Commission. And, as an American, we're famously disdainful of government. We understand how easy it must be to vent at Brussels and complain. But remember that every member of your union is a democracy. That's not an accident. Remember that no EU country has raised arms against another. That's not an accident. Remember that NATO is as strong as it's ever been. Remember that our market economies, as Angela and I saw this morning, are the greatest generators of innovation and wealth and opportunity in history. Our freedom, our quality of life remains the envy of the world, so much so that parents are willing to walk across deserts. And cross the seas on makeshift rafts, and risk everything in the hope of giving. Their children the blessings that you enjoy, blessings that you cannot take for granted. This continent, in the 20th century, was at constant war. People starved on this continent. Families were separated on this continent. And now people desperately want to come here precisely because of what you've created. You can't take that for granted. And today, more than ever, a strong, united Europe remains, as Adenauer said, a necessity for all of us. It's a necessity for the United States, because Europe's security and prosperity is inherently indivisible from our own. We can't cut ourselves off from you. Our economies are integrated. Our cultures are integrated. Our peoples are integrated. You saw the response of the American. People to Paris and Brussels. It's because, in our imaginations, this is our cities. A strong, united Europe is a necessity for the world because an integrated Europe remains vital to our international order. Europe helps to uphold the norms and rules that can maintain peace and promote prosperity around the world. Consider what we've done in recent years. Pulling the global economy back from the brink of depression and putting the world on the path of recovery. A comprehensive deal that's cut off every single one of Iran's paths to a nuclear bomb, part of our shared vision of a world without nuclear weapons. In Paris, the most ambitious agreement in history to fight climate change. That's what's possible when Europe and America and the world stand as one. And that's precisely what we're going to need to face down the very real dangers that we face today. So let me just lay out the kind of cooperation that we're going to need. We need a strong Europe to bear its share of the burden, working with us on behalf of our collective security. The United States has an extraordinary military, the best the world has ever known. But the nature of today's threats means we can't deal with these challenges by ourselves. Right now, the most urgent threat to our nations is ISIL. And that's why we're united in our determination to destroy it. And all 28 NATO allies are contributing to our coalition, whether it's striking ISIL targets in Syria and Iraq. Or supporting the air campaign, or training local forces in Iraq, or providing critical humanitarian aid. And we continue to make progress, pushing ISIL back from territory that it controlled. And just as I've approved additional support for Iraqi forces against ISIL, I've decided to increase U. S support for local forces fighting ISIL in Syria. A small number of American Special Operations Forces are already on the ground in Syria. And their expertise has been critical as local forces have driven ISIL out of key areas. So given the success, I've approved the deployment of up to 250 additional U.S. personnel in Syria. Including special forces, to keep up this momentum. They're not going to be leading the fight on the ground. But they will be essential in providing the training and assisting local forces that continue to drive ISIL back. So, make no mistake. These terrorists will learn the same lesson as others before them have, which is your hatred is no match for our nations united in the defense of our way of life. And just as we remain relentless on the military front, we're not going to give up on diplomacy to end the civil war in Syria, because the suffering of the Syrian people has to end. And that requires an effective political transition. But this remains a difficult fight, and none of us can solve this problem by ourselves. Even as European countries make important contributions against ISIL, Europe, including NATO, can still do more. So I've spoken to Chancellor Merkel and I'll be meeting later with the Presidents of France and the Prime Ministers of Great Britain and of Italy. In Syria and Iraq, we need more nations contributing to the air campaign. We need more nations contributing trainers to help build up local forces in Iraq. We need more nations to contribute economic assistance to Iraq so it can stabilize. Liberated areas and break the cycle of violent extremism so that ISIL cannot come back. These terrorists are doing everything in their power to strike our cities and kill our citizens. So we need to do everything in our power to stop them. And that includes closing gaps so terrorists can't pull off attacks like those in Paris and Brussels. Which brings me to one other point. Europeans, like Americans, cherish your privacy. And many are skeptical about governments collecting and sharing information. For good reason. That skepticism is healthy. Germans remember their history of government surveillance, so do Americans. By the way, particularly those who were fighting on behalf of civil rights. So it's part of our democracies to want to make sure our governments are accountable. But I want to say this to young people who value their privacy and spend a lot of time on their phones. The threat of terrorism is real. In the United States, I've worked to reform our surveillance programs to ensure that they're consistent with the rule of law and upholding our values, like privacy and by the way, we include the privacy of people outside of the United States. We care about Europeans' privacy, not just Americans' privacy.